Hello, I'm Chilvers, a consultant in early childhood education. I'm also an early education associate, and I led the Birth to 5 Matters working party group on observation assessment and planning. In this short film, I explain how we follow children's development and progress through the EYFS using the Birth to 5 Matters guidance, the ranges and the overlapping ovals. In a previous film, via early education, I looked at the process of observation, assessment and planning as a professionally informed skill based on our knowledge and understanding of children's development from birth to 5+. I talked about observation, assessment and planning, the process, as formative assessment or assessment for learning. This time, I want to just talk a little bit about summative assessment. So what's the relationship between summative assessment and formative assessment? Well, on this page from the Birth to 5 Matters guidance, we explain this. And in this diagram, you can see there is summative assessment at the centre. And on the left-hand side is really all the things we do for formative assessment. We gather information. That's what formative assessment is. We're gathering things from all over the place as we work with children. Some of it written down, some of it is in our heads and what we know about the child. So formative assessment is that information, which includes the child's voice, the parent's voice, the practitioner's voice, your voice particularly, about your knowledge of child development, and of course of the colleagues and professionals' perspectives as well. And we take all that, pull it together. Every now and then we have a stopping off point, stepping back, and we look and take an overview of where that child is. And that's called a summative assessment. And we use that summative assessment in many different ways. So the summative assessment really helps you to do all these things on the right-hand side of that diagram. Very importantly, it's there to help to share children's progress with parents and others, as well as having your understanding of children's progress. It helps you to identify and support children's opportunities through early intervention. It supports transitions to maintain children's developmental momentum through one key stage into another, or as they move from one room to another, as they go from the EYFS to the national curriculum and so on. But also it gives leaders and managers, head teachers, foundation stage coordinators, a strategic overview of progress, which they can use to look at the overall quality of the curriculum and practice and provision, and use that to identify needs for training or support. So summative assessment means taking a step back to summarise what we know about a child at a certain point in time, having gathered lots of that formative information, and now we're pulling all the threads together. It shouldn't be time consuming. The information you need is, you've already got it from your formative assessments, and it shouldn't require any more paperwork. In fact, summarising children's progress should be an interesting process to see how well you've supported the child's development and learning. And it's also a great opportunity to learn more about child development, because the more you observe, the more you think about your observations, the more you talk together about what you think the child is doing and how the child is progressing, the more you learn about child development. But also, let's not forget, it celebrates the child's unique pathway of development and education and who they are. So when we step back, it's there because we need to see children's development over a period of time and make an assessment of that journey that they've been on from, say, when they arrived in the setting or from the last progress summary. So it's about taking a holistic view, including thinking about the characteristics of effective learning, the areas of learning, the well-being of a child, their family perspectives, and perspectives from as many people as possible. It's there also, summative assessment also helps us to see the child's progress from their starting points. and where they are now. And so we can map their journey of development across those areas of learning, whilst we're remembering all those other things like the characteristics of early learning and so on. We also use the summative assessment to make a professionally informed decision about a child's development, learning and progress. And really that's about us making it visible. You know, how do we show in early years that children have made progress? And we see that through your observations, through your learning stories and through all that other information. But we need to gather it, and we need to just have an overview of it all and how it all connects, and holistically how the relationship between one area of learning, say, to another. So it's about making that professionally informed decision. However, there are two statutory points in the EYFS, which means that we are duty bound to do a summative assessment, and that's for the 2-year-old progress check and at the end of the foundation stage with the EYFS profile. Okay, so let's think about child development as a continuum from birth. So children's development outside the womb, because obviously, of course, there's been lots of development over those 9 months, but outside of the womb, development starts from the minute they're born. You know, they're not wasting a second. As soon as they are born, they are already making that connection with their parents. And the direction of travel begins from their starting points from the minute they're born and so on. And it builds on the natural momentum of their development. But each child's journey is going to be a very individual journey, winding pathways and so on. And it's going to be unique to that child. But in order to see children's progress, we need to understand where children's development and learning begins and how we support that developmental momentum, remembering that young children's development does not follow a predictable step-by-step sequence, with each child doing the same thing. They'll have their own unique pathway, progression and momentum. But there are certain aspects of child development that are typical for children, typical, say, for their age. And that's things like learning to walk, learning to talk, building relationships and so on. And again, we have to remember that all children will do that in their own way. That's why we love working with young children, because they are all so very different. But it's that balance, isn't it? Because over nature and nurture, because that will make a difference to the journey that the child has. So it's crucial for us to remember that young children are not smaller versions of older children. Development and learning is specific to them. So their developmental and learning momentum is going to be bespoke to them, unique to them. So as they build, as they grow, as they move through, you know, sort of being a baby and a toddler and into a 2-year-old, very specific development there. And, you know, as they get older, they are really building on what came before them that we need to think of, and always think about, well, how do we maintain and support children's developmental momentum? The Birth to 5 Matters guidance offers this developmental continuum through what's called the ranges and the overlapping ovals. So let's explain that a bit. What does that mean? So on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the ranges and the overlapping ovals from the Birth to 5 Matters guidance. So there are 6 broad developmental ranges and the typical age spans, which help us to refine children's progress and see if they're roughly where we would expect them to be, or if they're progressing more slowly or quickly. Now the ranges, you can see that with wobbly arrow going from the ranges, showing the pages in Birth to 5 Matters at the back, where each there is a guide, a very you know, a helpful guide but it's very broad. They're looking at very broad statements and ranges. of typical progression in development and learning. And they act as a guide, a point of reference to help you to understand and support children's development, learning and progress. So this typical progression in the Birth to 5 Matters guidance is not a checklist or a tick list, or it's there to be highlighted. It is there to just help you when you're thinking about, well, where do I think that child is? Which range do I think they're perhaps in? What do I know? And hopefully you're talking about this with a colleague. It's always good to have an observation and child development buddy and talk together about your children. So child's development is far more complex than even thinking about ticking or highlighting and so on. It is a much bigger aspect of children's learning and development. So we can see how the ranges are there for each area of learning and obviously describe this typical progression. There's also a very helpful paper in the Birth to 5 Matters resources section of the website, and I would recommend downloading that and having a good look at it. I'll add that at the end of this film. The ranges are all explained. This is range 1 that's explained here, and all the other ranges are also explained. You can find the reference to that in the resources on the website under Child Development and Overview. So how can you use this developmental continuum of the ranges and the overlapping age spans to make an informed and respectful decision about children's progress? So let's have a look at that. So let's see how we can use the Birth to 5 Matters developmental continuum in practice. So here is the continuum. You can see the 6 ranges, and above them are the typical age spans, if you like, that go across those ranges. And, how do you decide where a child may be along the continuum? And so this continuum acts as a guide for you to make this summative assessment, showing children's progress from their starting points. And this is where you start to make that professionally informed decision based on what you know about the child's development and learning. And that could be as a child settles into the setting or school right from the start, or it could be after a previous summative assessment. And the sort of things you're thinking about when you make this professionally informed decision are what you know about the child. And let's face it, you know a lot, because if you've been getting all your formative assessment together, you've got it all there, you've got loads of information in your head. Hopefully you're talking to your observation buddy or another colleague about a child, and you're saying, right, where do I think this child is now? So here's little Dylan, at nearly 3, and we're thinking, well, where do we think Dylan is now? What are we going to call upon to help us make that best fit decision? And so we call upon what we know, everything we know about the child. We look at our formative assessment and so on. And we can look in Birth to 5 Matters. We can look at those tables at the end where the ranges are in each of the areas of learning. And we can just cross-check and think, oh yes, that's where I thought he was. Yes, that's right. I think he's now in range 4. And then you make a decision after that. And you think, well, okay, he's in range 4. So where do I think in range 4? Because range 4 is quite broad. So you might want to refine that decision about where Dylan is by using the typical age spans to help you refine it. Other things to look at. So this is this document I was just telling you about that you can use as an aid memoir. But also don't forget your own observation toolkit. So this is something I talked about in the previous film about building your own toolkit. It's in here, your toolkit. You don't have to go and buy a toolkit. It's in here. And it's how you understand things like child development, the characteristics of effective learning, special educational needs, the development of speech and language, all those sort of things. Perhaps the development of schematic, threads of thinking, all those things, children's interests, all these things are helping you make this very informed, best fit decision about where the child is. So basically, you've brought everything into consideration through this summative assessment. You're looking at those ranges of perspective, such as I'm showing here, to strengthen your decision. And these perspectives include your formative assessment, including knowing the child's family, home background, and so on. All those things you know about the child. You're the professional. You're the person who needs to find out as much as you can about that child's development. Now, none of this requires a tick list or data or anything else to do that. It's about knowing your children well. Having a good understanding of child development, i.e. your toolkit, and being able to tell the story of the child's development, learning and progress from one summative point to another. So as I've said, to just recap, in the first instance, you'd think about which range most closely fits the child's development and learning. So try not to immediately think, oh, well, they're 2, so they'll be in range 3. Well, are they? Let's just check, because they may not. Think first about what the child is doing and what you've seen the child doing, and then think about which range it is. After that, you can refine. You can use the key typical ages to refine where you think the child is and whether the child's roughly on track or whether they might need extra support. So that helps you to really fine-tune things. So in effect, the Birth to 5 Matters developmental continuum is what Ofsted refers to as showing the content, sequencing and progression that a child has made and possible ways forward. Because as you talk about the child's progression along this continuum, you will be explaining, what did you do? What did you see when the child was doing this, say in communication and language? Maybe you responded by doing something to support them. Maybe it was eye contact or something like that. And you talk about how that happened and what you did and how you supported that child's development and progression. So don't forget, these are new things, but they're also rooted in very, very familiar things. The typical age spans are quite similar to the overlapping bands that we've been using for many years. So don't be afraid of anything new coming along. Grasp it and think, yeah, let's talk about this and think about how this can best help us to support those children and make their learning visible. Because it's a real joy, isn't it, to see when you've had that child for so many months or years even, and you've seen the journey that that child's been on, that unique journey, and you can talk about it with their parents and with other colleagues and so on, but also remembering, you've been a part of that. That's really important. So, hope that's been helpful. I just want to direct you to the Birth to 5 Matters website, because this is a treasure trove of all sorts of things. As I said, that paper on child development, which includes that paper on the ranges, that is under child development. So there's all these wonderful sections. So if you look at a unique child, you'll see that the first bullet point is child development, importantly. That's what we all really need to know. And that paper is there. It's the first one you get to. So go and have a look at it, because it's really helpful. And some people I know are downloading that and copying it, photocopying it and putting it handily around sort of where you might sit to do your observations or do your summative assessments. So there's lots of information there to help you do that. So do have a look. And also don't forget the early education website, because there's all sorts of training on there that will help you with this. So do embrace it. It's great that we are really talking about how we can make children's progress visible without using tick lists, highlighters, or anything else like that, but actually engaging our brains, really thinking about children, what we've seen children doing. So enjoy that, because that will build your toolkit up really well. Anyway, thanks very much, and hopefully see you at some of the training. Bye-bye.